Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ask Kati Anything. I am your host, licensed marriage and family therapist, Kati Morton. I'm so glad that you're here. In today's episode, we are going to talk about why we can sometimes think that we're in love with our therapist. Then we'll also get into ways that we can get unstuck in life and what to do with our passive suicidal thoughts. Then we'll jump into feeling safe after surviving a trauma and what that can look like, as well as how to deal with transference and attachment in therapy. Now, without further ado, let's jump into question number 1. This question says, help, Kati, I am in love with my therapist. I know you will probably say that transference is happening. I will. But I feel so madly in love with her. Everything about her is perfect, and she's the most beautiful person I've ever seen. I feel like no one I'll ever meet will ever even come close to how amazing she is and how much I feel for her. How do I stop having romantic feelings for my therapist? She's also my FP. That's my favorite person. And when we use the term FP, it's usually in relation to a borderline personality disorder or BPD diagnosis. So she's also my FP, and I idolize her so much and put her on a very high pedestal. And I'm so sensitive to how she treats me. And I would do anything in the world for her. How do I stop having FPs? And does this only happen in BPD? Thank you. And P.S. I'm not in therapy anymore. It ended because of the rules of the service. I mentioned to her that I like her so much and that I never want therapy to end and that she's the best person ever. I didn't say that I'm so in love with you because I was too scared that she'd find me weird or leave me. Okay, let's talk about this. Now, I have an older video about why we might feel like we're in love with our therapist. And the reason I'm saying it this way, that we might think we're in love or we might feel like we're in love, is because it's not authentic. And we'll get into that. But I have an entire video about this, and it is transference. It's called romantic transference or erotic transference. There's a lot of different terms for it. And the reason we call it transference is because when we've grown up in a situation, I'm just going to make some potential examples of what could have led us here. We grew up in a home where we're abused or neglected in some kind of way, or there's inconsistencies with our family, or we have repeated traumas, all of this stuff. When we have a very tumultuous upbringing and no one really shows us love or shows up for us or is there when we need them, and we don't really know who we can count on. And the people we thought we could count on hurt us, right? When we have situations like that happen growing up and we get into therapy, a therapist gives us attention, is consistent, shows us that they care, remembers things that we've told them, offers support, validation, empathy, all the things we really, really needed from the people that we grew up with or the caretakers that didn't treat us as well. Therefore, we can transfer onto our therapist the relationship that maybe we don't. It's almost like we don't know what love looks like. We especially don't know often what romantic love looks like. And it can get very confusing. That's why a lot of us can feel like, oh, I wish my therapist was my mother, or I wish my therapist was my best friend, or I wish my therapist was my romantic partner. I think that I'm in love with them. I know you might think, well, Kati, those are very different scenarios. They're really not. Having an attachment to our therapist or having that kind of transference onto our therapist is incredibly common because we often haven't been treated well before or had this type of relationship before. And a therapeutic relationship is kind of different, right? We don't know anything about them. So they're going to present without, it's called they're going to give us unconditional positive regard. And what that means is that when you're a therapist, you show up for people and offer them empathy, support, understanding, all the things I talked about without judgment, without any expectations from them. There are no strings attached to that type of support and validation that we're offering. And that unconditional positive regard is like, no matter what you do, I'm going to see you in a positive light. Think of the terms, unconditional positive regard. And we do this so that you feel safe and okay to share in therapy. And it's a great way to foster a very healthy therapeutic relationship. However, again, going back to, this person thinking that they're in love with their therapist when we haven't experienced that with anybody else before. No one's ever offered us unconditional positive regard because it only really exists in therapy. We get confused. We think maybe we wish they were our mom. We think maybe I'm in love with them. Maybe that's what it is because this relationship is so perfect, right? That's why we call it transference, like erotic transference, romantic transference. That's why this happens so often. And that's why I say that you think you're in love, because it's actually not based in any real relationship. Again, we don't know that much about our therapist if they're good at their job. In fact, we really shouldn't know much, if anything, about them at all, other than if they're qualified to do the job that we are paying them to do, right? We don't know if they're married or not. Maybe they've mentioned it offhand as for some other reason. We don't know if they have children or not. We don't know if they're gay, straight, bi. We don't know any of that. We don't know if they're religious. We don't know their political views. We don't know where they live or what they like to do for hobbies. Maybe we know one thing. It's very, very limited. We actually don't even know what they really think or believe about you, about your situation, about your life, about their life, about the world. We don't know that because they don't share that, because that's not valuable for you and your therapeutic time with them. And so thinking that we're in love with a therapist has everything to do with our the transference and attachment wounds, and feeling like we've never been shown love before, and we think this must mean that we're in love with them. It must be romantic. I find this to be the most common, not always, but most commonly this happens with my patients who have had some kind of sexual assault, sexual abuse in their past. Because when someone showed them attention and showed them love, it was in a sexual manner, in a quote unquote like romantic type of relationship, right? I'm using air quotes because it's not, there's nothing romantic about it, but you know what I mean? It's in that type of form. And so when we have somebody show us attention and, care, support, we think that must be romantic. And so that's what's happening here. Now, to move on to your other questions, how do I stop having romantic feelings from my therapist? The truth is to figure out where it comes from. Check your facts on it. Like, do I really know anything about them? And I'd encourage you, honestly, to journal a little bit about what you believe love to look like. And I'd even push you, I'd challenge you a little bit to be like, what do you really know about your therapist? Oh, Roxy agrees. But I would want you to spend some time considering that, because the way to really get out of this or to stop having these feelings is to work through it, figure out where it's coming from. Because the truth is it's not a real relationship. It's not a romantic relationship. We think we're in love with them. And I'm not saying this to say that it doesn't feel real to you, because it very much does. But I'm saying that in order to stop having this, we have to be curious, not judgmental about this process for us. How did we come to this assumption or to this conclusion? How do we get here? Have we ever been in love with someone before? What was that like? Was the term love thrown around in conjunction with abuse growing up? Is that why it feels so confusing, right? All of that is going to be incredibly healing and help us untangle ourselves from this. I also will say that the fact that you have BPD, healing from what I'd assume is most likely, BPD usually comes out of trauma, but not always, but healing from that trauma, whether that means through movement, through EMDR, through talk therapy, any of those things, through doing some DBT or dialectical behavior therapy, that will allow you to recognize where your attachment wounds are showing up and impeding your abilities to move forward, like in falling in love with a therapist or having favorite people. Again, to get away from having FPs, it has to do a ton with emotion regulation. I know that kind of sounds, people are like, what about interpersonal effectiveness? It's there too, but I find my patients have favorite people because of this this dysregulation that we have around feeling like we're not good enough and we're lonely, like we're an open shell of a person. Everybody describes it differently, but it's kind of this like lack of identity that my patients with BPD struggle with. And FPs are these people that we feel can fill that void. And it's, again, that attachment wound. It's that old hurt. And we're trying to put somebody in the present into that old hurt when we really have to heal it ourselves first. I hope that makes sense. I know it's a little esoteric, a little tricky, but essentially, if we heal from the trauma in our past, these issues will go away. And I know easier said than done, but that's why I mentioned a ton of different modalities, everything from DBT to somatic experiencing, EMDR. Any of those can be helpful to help to allow you to move through this and not feel so hung up on it. Okay. Moving on to question number 2, it says, hey, Kati, could you please talk about how one can get unstuck in life? I feel like I'm reliving the same day over and over again and not growing or evolving anymore. I'm so used to watching life on the sidelines, like a movie, as opposed to actively participating in it. For reference, I do suffer from depression and am on medication for it. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Of course. I had a couple thoughts with this. Now, first is if we feel like we're watching life from the sidelines, my like little gut reaction was like, are we dissociating? I just want to throw that out there. If so, we need to work on grounding techniques. We need to figure out what's causing the dissociation, only because I have patients that will say they feel like they're a little bit removed from things. Now, I don't know if that's what you mean, because you said it's like I'm not actively participating in it. I'm just kind of like watching other people do things. I wanted to throw that out there just in case. However, when it comes to depression, if you're on medication for it and you still are not finding enjoyment in anything that you do, which sounds like that might be what's happening here, we still feel down most days. It's hard to motivate. We feel, maybe little body aches or lethargy, or, sleep is all off. Let your doctor know, because being on medication for it doesn't mean that it's an effective dose or that it's the proper medication for you, right? There's a ton of different ones out there. We want to find the right one for you at this time. And so let them know that the medication that you're on isn't giving you full reduction of symptoms or full remission. We're still experiencing it. Okay. However, let's get up to the first question. Let's talk about getting unstuck in life. Now, there are two real answers I have here, okay? When we're feeling stuck in our life, number one, we are going to have to do different things. Doing the same thing every day and expecting a different result is technically the definition of insanity. And so if you're wanting to get unstuck, let's try one new thing. Maybe we join a different club, or we say yes to people going to happy hour at work when we normally wouldn't. Or maybe instead of doing the same thing on a Saturday, we get up and we go to a coffee shop and sit for a little while. Just mix it up. Maybe we go for a little walk around the block. Maybe we take our dogs out, or maybe, I don't know, maybe we go to the park. Could do all sorts of things. I know it's getting cold out, but you could still sit outside bundled up. Nobody says you can't. Bring some hot chocolate. So we have to do something different. If you're feeling stuck, let's make a change. Like tonight, maybe instead of staying in like you normally would, let's take yourself out to dinner. I know things are expensive. I'm not saying it has to cost you money. I'm just giving an example. Maybe instead of staying in, we call a friend and we go out to a movie. I don't know. Maybe we see what everybody's up to. We have to switch it up. Maybe we should send out some texts right now to see what people are up to in the next couple of days, and we go spend some time with somebody. Maybe we take that cooking class we've been putting off. Maybe we go peruse and like window shop, in town. I don't know. There's a ton of different things that you can do, but doing the same exact thing and expecting a different result will always keep you stuck. Now, the second path to getting unstuck in life is often making choices that we're not comfortable making. And what I mean by that is we have tons of opportunity in our life. We are all so fortunate, right? We have tons of options, but we often don't choose options that are available to us because we don't know about them, or because we think some kind of way, we have some belief system about it, or we're stuck in a rut, right? We're stuck. And so I encourage you, I guess they're kind of tied, but I find what I'm talking about here with like making choices that we aren't always comfortable making is that this could be that we aren't asking for that promotion that we know we deserve. We're continuing in that relationship that's going nowhere, or we're in this toxic friendship that's all take and no give. We know we can get out of those things. I know people are like, well, it's easier said than done. Of course, but we all have choices. And when we're feeling stuck, I often believe that we aren't taking the choices that we have seriously, and we're making the same one over and over again, even though we don't like the result. Kind of like back to what I was talking about in that first option. It's like doing different things. This is like make different choices. So if we find ourselves, like I said, in these repeat scenarios, like, oh, I am living in this place I don't like, in this job that I hate, and I'm in this relationship that's going nowhere. Okay, so what actions could we take to get a different job, or to move, or to end that relationship? And in what order would we want those things to happen to give us like the most, stable type of dismount from it? Maybe we start to get our resume ready, and in the new year, we go out looking for a good job, looking for something in a different field. Maybe we start volunteering at a certain organization because we think that might be where we want to move to. Maybe we get our LinkedIn stuff situated and we start reaching out to people. Those are the things that I'm talking about. So when we're feeling stuck, we can do one of two things. Number one, we're going to have to like try new things. We can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Maybe instead of staying in, we go out, right? Instead of not reaching out, we start texting some friends. Maybe we go for a walk. We take a new class, something like that. Or, and kind of in the same vein, we make the choices that we are sometimes too afraid to make, because we know, if we're honest with ourselves, we know that if we keep doing this, it's not making us happy. And yes, I know that the other choice is a little scary and unknown, but we're going to have to make that choice if we expect anything to change. Okay? I think that's why so many of us feel so stuck in our lives, is because we're afraid. Fear is a huge motivator, but I encourage you, be scared and do it anyway. It'll be okay. I mean, think about it. Be like, make a concerted effort to think it through, but you can get a different job and then quit your old one. You can end a relationship that's not getting you anywhere and it's only harming you. You can move. You can reinvent yourself. We're never too old. It's never too late. And you never have to feel like you're just stuck with what you have where you are. Okay? Hope that helps. Moving on to question number 3, it says, "Hey, Kati, could you talk a bit more about passive suicidal thoughts? I almost got run over by a truck when crossing the street. He stopped in time at the end, and I basically didn't care. No shock, nothing. I just thought, first of all, embarrassing. Second of all, this death would have been very welcome. Sadly, he stopped in time. I went about my day as usual, thinking about how chill I reacted, not even caring if I would have died or not. I do have a past when it comes to suicidal thoughts and depression." Now, passive suicidal thoughts, for those who don't know, is essentially I call them like flutter in and out, kind of like they're welcome guests, but they don't stay very long. And then they're kind of like, I could take my life, or maybe I would do it this way, or like this person, they could have hit me, I could have died, it wouldn't, whatever. They're very passive. By definition, passive means not active, right? So there's no plan, there's no means, there's no threat to our life. It's not imminent. We aren't going to do anything, but we have these thoughts about our life ending or taking our own life, okay? And so that's really what those are. And when we're having those, I'd argue that they're way, way, way more common than people realize. If anybody has any sort of mental health struggles, especially in the vein of depression, PTSD, BPD, things like that, even eating disorders, non-suicidal self-injury, we can have passive suicidal thoughts for a long time. And I, as a therapist, am personally not that worried about it as long as I'm aware and we have a safety plan in place and you tell me about it. Like, I check in with my patients. I used to every couple of weeks. At the beginning, I'd check in every week. And then as things were more stable, I'd wait for a few weeks to go by and I'd be like, just checking in. How are we doing on, those suicidal thoughts? And usually they'll say like, nothing to worry about, nothing different. They kind of flutter in and out. Okay. As long as we're not engaging with them, I'm not worried about them. I believe they happen because of, remember I talked about all those different diagnoses, complex PTSD, depression, eating disorders, non-suicidal self-injury, all those different diagnoses. I believe these suicidal thoughts or passive suicidal thoughts can come along with it because they all have this kind of like flavor of hopelessness or helplessness. Like, I don't know how to make it better. I don't feel safe or okay. What am I supposed to do? We can feel just almost like to the question before, like I can feel really stuck or feel really unsure of myself or feel like this is just always how it's going to be. And that kind of like hopeless or helpless experience is so closely tied to suicidal thoughts that I believe that's why these are connected. And so that's why I'm, like you said, you have a past when it comes to suicidal thoughts and depression. That's why they're there. If you find them getting more intense or having more of a plan, becoming more active, let somebody know about it, okay? Your therapist, whoever your treatment team people are in your life, let them know so we can get you more support, because suicidal thoughts are common and they can be managed and dealt with without doing us any harm. We just have to tell somebody about it. And I have videos about the safety plans and all of that. You can check those out too. Okay? Oh, and just one last thing, because you said that truck like didn't stop, or you were like, oh, he stopped in time, dang it. That's incredibly common. I've had patients sometimes think like, oh, like they hit their brakes in their car and they're like, oh, I could have almost like smashed into them or driven off of this bridge into the water. And I feel like those can be, just for those listening, those can be intrusive thoughts. Remember, intrusive thoughts are part of OCD and they tend to be violent or sexual in nature. This would be a violent version. But for those of us with suicidal thoughts, that's really common. And again, I think it's because we just don't feel any motivation to live or any excitement or any, I don't know, like we're not looking forward to anything in our life. And so I encourage you, like I said, to tell your therapist this is happening if you haven't already. And let's work on putting some of those goals out there of like things that we want to do, people we want to be there for. Even if it for the moment is like for the next week, I don't want to let my therapist down or I don't want to upset my sister or my friend. That's fine. We can do week to week. We can do day to day, whatever, wherever you're at. But let's have some little reasons why we want to stick around, because I think that helps combat these as well. Let's move on to question number 4. It says, hey, Kati, what does it mean to quote unquote feel safe? I have complex PTSD and am hypervigilant. I get relaxation induced anxiety. I've tried following steps for reducing this, but they often ask you to visualize somewhere you feel safe or someone you feel safe with. What does feel safe mean? Is it a feeling in the body, or is it just the absence of overt fear? Or is it just an expression for some concept, like saying something is an act of God? I expect my issue has the same root cause as my inability to feel happy or positive emotions. Yes, it probably does, but when it comes to complex PTSD, the goal, truthfully, is not to feel safe. Because safe, when we have a history of repeated traumas, feeling quote unquote safe means we're vulnerable to being hurt again. So in even the act of trying to feel safe, we feel very unsafe. And it can cause us to go into like a dissociative state. It can, we can be triggered and be in hypervigilance mode. Like you said, the anxiety, the relaxation induced anxiety, that's because you're letting your guard down. Feeling safe is like akin to letting the guard down. And if we let our guard down, someone can hurt us. So why would we do that? We wouldn't, right? Which is why when we have a history of trauma, the goal is not safety, the goal is neutrality. I know that doesn't sound as exciting, but the reason that that's our goal is because that doesn't mean we're vulnerable. That just means we're not queued up in fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And that's the goal. So things that can elicit neutrality tend to be very meh behaviors, such as taking our dog for a walk, unloading the dishwasher, vacuuming, folding laundry, coloring. Anything that's repetitive, we find those kind of like repetitive movements to be really soothing to our system. But again, the goal is not to feel safe. The goal is to just not feel queued up, to feel neutral. And so try some of those things. I know a lot of them are like cleaning based. It's just because there's a lot of repetitive motion with that. But I said like coloring, taking your dog for a walk. There's all sorts, or just walking. If you don't have an animal, go for a walk. All of those things can help us feel a little bit more a little bit more neutral. And so that's the goal, because feeling safe, to answer your question, what does feeling safe mean? It means there's no potential threat. We aren't queued up at all. We feel that we can lean into and relax into the moment, the space, the person. There's a feeling of someone having you, like they got your back. You're okay. It's going to be okay. There's no worry about something happening because you are safe. It's almost like, and I know for those with past trauma in their childhood, this isn't going to work for you, but for me, it's like that feeling of sleeping over at my grandma and papa's house. And she'd always have so many blankets on that bed and she would play with my hair until I fell asleep. And that was safety, man. That was like, oh, so cozy, so nice. And whatever that means for you. But see, when we have trauma, even as I said that, you're like, first of all, I can't fucking think of that. Second of all, that makes me feel super anxious, right? That's why the goal is not to feel safe. The goal is to feel neutral. But I also believe, and I agree with you when you say, I expect this is kind of tied to your inability to feel happy or positive emotions. Yes, because feeling happy, feeling positive, like I had a patient once that said, if I get excited about this, that means that I could be really disappointed if it doesn't turn out the way I want it to. Oof, right? If I allow myself to feel happy, then that means that the sadness or the badness will feel that much more intense and it will like be blindside me, right? Then when we have trauma, our body's goal is to keep us from being traumatized again. And so that's why we're hypervigilant all the time, looking for a potential threat. And guess what? Getting excited, feeling happy, that can be threatening because that means our guard is down. Again, this all goes back to letting our guard down. So I hope that kind of helps you tease it out. It's very, very common to feel this way. But again, the goal is neutrality, not quote unquote feeling safe. Okay? Moving on to question number 5, it says, hey, Kati, what happens if transference and extreme attachment is not worked through in therapy and then therapy ends? This has happened for me and I am so overwhelmed by my emotions 24/7. I know how to work on attachment stuff by myself now from your videos, but I just don't know how to get closure, if that makes sense. Of course it does. I miss her so much and it takes everything in me not to text her. Therapy ended a few months ago and I still miss her like crazy and I'm so sad about it. Will that ever get better? Also, can you feel quote unquote worse in a way if you don't work through issues, for example, transference that came up in therapy? Thank you so much for your videos. Of course. Now there's an add-on to this one, but let's just dive right in. Now, if transference itself isn't worked on in therapy and then therapy ends, what that essentially means is the issue that we've had with the relationship that we transferred onto our therapist. Let me explain what transference is, and then I'll tell you what I'm saying, because maybe that'll make it more clear. When we have transference in therapy, that means that we transfer onto our therapist a relationship that we have or have had in our life that didn't go well. Meaning, like, if I have a tough time with my mom, then I transfer that type of dynamic onto my therapist and start treating her like she's my mom. I've transferred it on. Now, countertransference, which is very unhealthy, is when the therapist reacts out of that and doesn't notice what's happening and not react. Anyways, that's what transference is. And if it's not worked on, it definitely didn't make anything better, but I wouldn't necessarily be concerned that it's like pushing you over the edge and making things so much more difficult. It's essentially, unfortunately, kind of like validating the relationship dynamic that we had that we tried to transfer onto our therapist. So it can kind of make that feeling or that experience of that relationship that much worse, or potentially validate or support a belief we have about ourselves in relationships, right? Like, oh, I'm not worthy of this. This is never going to work out. No one's going to love me. No one's going to care about me. It can support that, which isn't healthy at all. And this isn't good. But I don't want you to feel like, oh, it made it so much worse for me. Not necessarily. But it definitely didn't help you work through it at all. Okay. And then the attachment stuff. Okay. So you miss her so much. My encouragement for you is to watch some of my videos about inner child work and to do some of that. And the reason that I bring this up is because I feel like your therapist filled that void inside of you that was left by like an uncaring caregiver, mother, father, whoever. And we put them inside that hole in ourselves, thinking that they would be there forever and they could make us whole and they could make us feel better. And we can stop seeking it out. And while that's very normal and natural, the true way to heal is to actually uncover what's going on for ourselves, what we really need, and then offer it to ourselves. And the reason for this is, number one, we're the only one that knows what we need and how we need it and can give it to us correctly. But also, we are the only one we can count on. And I don't mean that to mean like toxic independence. You can't count on anybody else. But when it comes to healing these types of wounds, because we're so sensitive, rightfully so, any time a person doesn't quite do something right or doesn't show up for us in the way that we truly needed, we can feel hurt all over again. It's like ripping and making that hole bigger. And so in order to have a safe and healing experience, or a neutral and healing experience, we have to give it to ourselves. And so I encourage you to check out, I have my inner child workshop on my website, that you can go to katimorton.com, go into the shop. It's over there. I also have a ton of free videos on YouTube. Just go, inner child, Kati Morton. They'll all pop up. So I did a bunch of those as well. And that should help you move past this and heal, not only from the original wound, but now from the wound caused by therapy. And it will get better, okay? I'm so sorry that therapy had to end. So annoying. Oof. Now, there was a comment on this that said, also, Kati, I would love to hear your comments on how to get past the feeling that although therapy is helpful, it's somehow fake because I need to pay someone in order to be heard and understood. Sometimes it increases the feelings of worthlessness. I was sexually abused as a child, and during my first years of therapy, nobody close to me wanted to hear about it. It took me years to be able to find and open up with understanding people who took away that belief that the only way someone could hear me and support me was by me having to pay them to do so. Okay, got you. I guess that my take on this is going to be a little bit interesting. You might not like it, but here it is. Now, the thought that we have to pay someone in order to be heard and understood, I think we're viewing therapy the wrong way. Because the reason that we pay someone is to help us understand ourselves and improve our life. We're not paying someone just to to be heard and understood. That honestly is helpful, but it doesn't really get us where we're going to get, right? We actually know through research that when we vent to people, let's say to our friend, the venting about a situation without any support, without any guidance, without any growth, without any challenge, that venting improves our relationship and our connection with that person. So if this is our friend, like me and my girlfriend, like if I'm venting to her, I feel even better. I leave that situation being like, oh my God, I'm so much more connected to her. I really feel like she gets me. That helps. However, when it comes to the situation I was actually venting about, there's no improvement. And in many cases, they found that we felt like even more assured of that problem. So it almost like reinforces the problem. And so I bring that up because if you apply that to therapy, if we're just talking to our therapist and they're not challenging us, they're not giving us homework, they're not having us think about things in a different way, like reframing something, then it's not actually going to benefit us. And so instead of thinking that therapy is someone that we pay in order to feel heard and understood, I would challenge you to say, no, therapy is a place where I go to pay for their expertise to help me better understand myself and improve my life. Because that kind of makes, I don't know if that sounds better to you, but that does to me, because it doesn't feel like I'm paying someone to listen to me. My dad used to say that back in the day when we first all went to therapy. He's like, I don't need to pay someone to listen to me. And I'm like, that's not actually what you're paying them for. I mean, sure, that's part of it. But you're actually paying for them to take all the shit you talk about and all the random things that are happening in your life, put it through their education and their experience, and then offer you an alternative view or challenge a faulty thought or belief, right? We're paying someone for their expertise in the same way we'd pay a doctor. Like, yeah, I know my arm hurts, but I don't really know how to know what it hurts or how to fix it. And so I go to an orthopedist or a doctor or a PT or something, right? They tell me. It's the same with therapy. I don't really know what's necessarily wrong, but I know that I don't like this. My relationship is bothering me in this way. And the therapist takes all that and is like, interesting. Have you considered this, right? It's that. So I just challenge you to kind of reframe that it's not paying to be heard and understood. It's paying to have someone help you understand yourself and improve your life. Final question number 6 says, hey, Kati, in your opinion, is it important to get a proper diagnosis? Yes, we'll talk about this. I was in therapy, but I never received a proper diagnosis. In my country, only psychiatrists are allowed to diagnose you. Oh, interesting. I think I have quiet BPD among other mental illnesses, and my former therapist told me I have BPD tendencies, but she doesn't think it would be helpful for me to see a psychiatrist to receive a proper diagnosis, as it's a label I'll be stuck with for life. Oh, that's so frustrating. I'm not sure how to feel about this topic, because on one hand, I feel like I want a diagnosis because I want validation, I guess, and I want to know what it is exactly. But I also understand her point, and I find it weird how a psychiatrist would diagnose me in an hour without really knowing me. Me too. Would that even be accurate? I'm also strangely scared of having a diagnosis on file. Also, I don't think I would get any treatment for it if I have a diagnosis over public health insurance, I mean. What's your opinion on it? Thank you so much. Of course. A couple of things. First of all, I think it's very important for us to get a proper diagnosis, because that ensures that the treatment that we're receiving is in line with what we're struggling with. If I'm treating you for anxiety, but you really are struggling with self-injury thoughts, it's not going to help, right? And it's just like going to a doctor. You don't want them to be treating for your ear infection when you have a gastrointestinal issue. And it's just not going to work. And so that's why proper diagnoses, like diagnoses as a whole, are important. I don't like that only psychiatrists can diagnose you. I agree with you that or not really agree with you, but like what you're kind of saying without saying here is that how could he diagnose me in an hour without really knowing me? I don't believe that they can. In the States, the only people that can't diagnose you, it depends on the state, but I know in California at the very least, I'm not sure about Texas, but LPCs, like licensed counselors, can't diagnose in California, but social workers, LMFT, such as myself, psychologists, and obviously psychiatrists can all diagnose. And truly, I think the people who we do therapy with are the ones that spend the most time with us and know us. And a diagnosis of BPD takes time to properly give someone. I always feel like in order to give someone a personality disorder, which I even hate that term, but they're more pervasive, they tend to affect more areas of our life. I feel like we need to be with that therapist and me with that patient for a longer period of time, so I can see if this is like more of a bipolar type cycle, like it comes and goes, it could be in a few weeks, or is this more pervasive and it's affecting more parts of their life, right? I'm going to need to see somebody for a while to be sure that I give a proper diagnosis. So I don't like that that's your only option, but I will tell you that getting a proper diagnosis is important to ensure that we get the right kind of care. Now, I don't know how it works where you are, but I do want to at least acknowledge the fact that BPD does unfortunately come with a stigma. And it's very frustrating. That's why I talk about it a lot and try to educate as much as I can about it. But because it can be completely managed, but not everybody believes that. And it's often something that can make it hard for you to find other mental health professionals to take you on because they won't treat BPD. A lot of people say, oh, I don't treat that, and try to refer you out. There's all sorts of reasons that it can get in our way. And so I guess you'd have to decide what's best for you based on the fact that we want to make sure you're getting the right kind of care. Medication can help. I've had tons of BPD patients work with their psychiatrists, as a book, and get proper medication for some of their symptoms of BPD. So you could see a psychiatrist, but decide whether you would prefer to know and have an answer, because getting a diagnosis is incredibly validating. It gives us a name to put to how we feel, and we can feel like a relief to be like, oh, I'm not making it up, or I'm not just crazy, right? Sometimes we need that kind of validation. And so it can be really important. But also on the other flip side is like, do I want that on my file? Do I want that diagnosis attached to me? Do I think that's going to impede me in some way? And only you know that answer. But those are overall my thoughts on it. And I think that barring any stigma, barring any, having to see someone for just an hour, like I always think it's important to get a proper diagnosis so that we're getting proper treatment. Okay? Thank you all so much for listening and watching. Have a very Merry Christmas if you celebrate, and Happy Hanukkah to those who celebrate that. Have a wonderful holiday season. I love you all. Take care of yourselves. Do your homework, and I'll see you next time. Bye.